without further ado, Jen, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'll just do a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Yes. Okay, I'm in an office in my house, so the internet connection is, I'm a bit far from the router. So if there's an issue, let me know and I'll move, okay? So first of all, welcome everybody. To those of you in the Peace Certificate, it's nice to meet you. I think outside of pandemic times, there are lots and lots of connections between all of the certificates. So it's really exciting to be here. And if you were wondering why our meeting didn't start with a land acknowledgement, if you listened to the podcast in preparation for today, you know why. So I just would like to know, and it's fine if you didn't have time to listen to the podcast, I'd just like to know, maybe you can do the little thumbs up if you did. I just want to know sort of how to start my presentation. So I see that some people listened to the podcast, others did not. If you're intrigued by today's discussion, I strongly encourage listening to the podcast. So just don't worry about it, okay, if you haven't. Also, I'd just like to say that 2 students who are part of the certificate are here today. And they're going to be talking a little bit about land acknowledgements in the certificate as well. So it's going to be short, not to worry, Ivan. So just to start off a little bit, if you're wondering about my gorgeous earrings, these were purchased at a powwow in Ganasatake almost 10 years ago. So they are still in amazing shape. And I often like to wear a piece of Indigenous art when doing certificate activities. This is a very meaningful way to support Indigenous peoples, arts, and also reconciliation. So to introduce myself a little bit, this is always part of decolonization and indigenizing work, is to orient yourself to it. So I am not Indigenous. I'm originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I have Mennonite, British, and American roots. Winnipeg, where I grew up, is on Treaty 1 territory, lands that are the heartland of the Métis people, and all of the water that I drank as a child and that I drink today when I visit family there is sourced from the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. I've been a professor at Dawson in the anthropology department since 2009, and I love teaching classes that focus on cultural understanding and curiosity. This past fall, I was asked to be the coordinator of the Decolonization and Indigenization Studies Certificate, and this was very much an honor to be invited into this role, especially as a settler myself. And I come to this role of coordinator with a strong awareness of my settler roots, and I strive as best as I can to move forward with care and respect as the certificate takes shape. Consultation and collaboration with Indigenous colleagues, students, elders, and stakeholders is central to decisions, idea generation, and evaluation of the certificate. So to start off the discussion today, I just would like to remind people what a land acknowledgement is. So if you don't know, or if you're kind of rusty a little bit, a land acknowledgement is, at its most basic, a statement of recognition of the peoples whose traditional lands we are on. The purpose of a land acknowledgement is to show an awareness of Indigenous presence and highlights land rights. And as Chelsea Vowell, Métis scholar, highlights, it should also force non-Indigenous peoples to confront their own place on these lands. So land acknowledgements are often done at the beginning of ceremonies, lectures, and public events, when most or some of the participants are not the first peoples of the land where the event is taking place. So it's a way to recognize historical and contemporary expressions of colonialism and the need for change. Those of you who listened to the podcast or read the transcript will know is that land acknowledgements are often critiqued and often sometimes not welcome. They're critiqued for things like being inaccurate, having poor pronunciation, feeling forced or like box ticking. And this is in particular reference to standardized land acknowledgements. So most higher level education institutions have their own land acknowledgements. Dawson has one, Concordia has one, McGill has one. And these are often sort of expected to be presented at the start of all events. And so in recent years, as this has become part of being an educational institution, it's sort of started to lose, in some cases, some of the meaning. And as we saw in the podcast, the idea of the importance of land acknowledgements being meaningful and followed with action has become really present at the forefront. And so as a settler running this certificate, even today being asked to come and talk about something, I was like, well, what on earth can I talk about as a non-Indigenous person? It would be completely inappropriate for me to talk about most things because I'm not positioned within them. I'm a learner to them. And so I chose this topic because this is a very important part of the role of coordinator for the for the Decolonization and Indigenization Studies certificate. And also this was something, also most of the students who are part of this certificate are non-Indigenous. There are also Indigenous students, and there may well be Indigenous students here today, but this is something that I wanted to not be box ticking in the certificate. And so here with me today are two students, and Aiden has to leave for a class at 1. So Aiden, don't worry if you sort of drop out at some point. We all will know why. It's so wonderful that you squeezed this into your very packed Zoom schedule today. But Hope and Aiden were both recently participants in the Beading Together workshop. If anyone here becomes interested in this, there's about 5 spots left. So you can send me a Mio message about joining this beading workshops over Zoom with Corey Hunlin, who's a Chilcotin artist from BC, working out of Jojage, the Ganyagehaga or Mohawk word for Montreal. And he just ran this amazing workshop, 2 workshops over spring break for certificate students. So there's one more, about 5 spots left if you'd like in. You will learn how to make an earring that looks a little bit like this. This is my 4th pair. My first pair was definitely not this nice.
Jen.
Okay, so you got to moderate expectations. Yeah.
Jen, this is my first attempt, right? Okay. This is my
awesome.
Oh, sorry, I have another pair to go, but I loved it.
Awesome. Yeah, so Joanne joined the workshop, and it was so interesting to learn from Corey. His way of teaching was very different than the way that I deliver information in my classes. He was patient, and anyways, it was really special. So part of the preparation for these workshops, I had thought, well, of course I'll do a land acknowledgement, and I like to infuse that with meaning. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. Students who are in this certificate, non-Indigenous students or Indigenous students who are on lands of a different people, as they study, maybe I should reach out to students and see if they could work on it. And so I spoke with Joe Andino, who's the coordinator of the First Peoples Center. And I said, do you think this should be something for activity points, or should this be something that's really just sort of a volunteer thing? And she said, absolutely points. This is work, this is important, and this is a lot of learning. And so I was hoping that would be her answer. And so for the Beading Together project, Hope and Aiden, as well as 2 other students, worked independently and together on preparing land acknowledgements for the beading workshops. So Hope, I think I'm going to start with you. And I'll just ask you to start by sharing your land acknowledgement, and then we'll talk about it a little bit after, if that's okay with you.
Sounds good. All right. So it starts off with, before we begin, we acknowledge that Dawson College is located on unceded Indigenous lands, therefore acknowledging that the Ganyagehaga Nation are the rightful custodians of the lands and waters that they have allowed for us to gather here in Jojage. While Jojage is commonly called Montreal, this island is known for its history of being a gathering place for many First Nations. In addition, it is a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and non-Indigenous persons. that has shaped the island it is presently, and therefore we respect our continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with the Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal Chogagage community. And I apologize for the pronunciation mess ups because for some reason I still want to add some more in the pronunciation. It's just an automatic thing. I apologize.
Great.
No need to apologize. It's very meaningful for everybody to see students learning and practicing, as you can see with the applause reactions coming forward. So Hope, can you share with us a little bit, can you tell us a bit about the process of developing the land acknowledgement for you?
Of course. So Jennifer gave the students who wanted to work on the land acknowledgements to the Concordia one because they had information of the history, the pronunciation, and in a lot of ways it is similar to Dawson's land acknowledgement. So much so that I was actually scared of plagiarizing both. And that was very important to try to write this in my own words while still getting to the heart of the acknowledgement, which is we are on these lands. We acknowledge that we are on these lands, even though we're not supposed to be. But to be able to call this home, we must work together and move forward together in the acknowledgement of our past, present, and hopefully ongoing futures. Another issue was, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Keep going, Hope. Keep going. Keep going.
It was that many of us, because I managed to get, because some had shared their versions as well as I had shared mine to some, we're wondering, do we acknowledge the atrocities committed by settlers? I opted out because this is supposed to, because when I made the land acknowledgement is for a session in which we were supposed to be learning from Corey, and I wanted to keep it uplifting and encouraging. Any other time that we are supposed to be discussing emotionally charged topics for Indigenous First Nations, then I would make the acknowledgement, but because I want to keep it light and fun and to the theme of what we were doing for the project, I felt I would opt out on that for this version.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think this is something that can come up a lot to people working on land acknowledgements is, in addition to the territory, what do I acknowledge and what sort of tone is to be set? And sometimes they're very short, sometimes they're long. And I think this is part of what was being talked about in the podcast actually was that land acknowledgements should come from a place that's meaningful and followed by action. So in this case, there was the following of action by having this workshop where we're learning about Indigenous arts from Corey. And there was another part of the action, but I'll get to that in a minute. And just out of curiosity, Hope, how long did it take you, or how much time do you think you spent on preparing the land acknowledgement?
I think a good 4 hours to feel confident with the paragraph that I had. And that was because I wanted to make sure that I am not just copying, pasting, I'm adding into my own words while getting to the heart of it, as well as making sure it didn't sound, again, once again, a copy and paste, because as the podcast made it very clear is that eventually it does become a tick in the box. It does become, a lot of people become habituated with the whole concept of it, especially as adults. I could see land acknowledgement being really good for elementary schools because kids open up and ask questions like, what lands are we on? And other discussions that should be talked about earlier than grade 4.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your experience, or does that sort of sum it up?
Well, my husband's First Nations. He's actually part of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. And he was actually quite happy that I worked on this and helped me with the pronunciations best he could. And it was also a nice moment for us to share in learning.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Aiden, you're here as well. I'm not sure if you have your land acknowledgement with you. If you do, perhaps you could read it to us. If not, maybe you can talk a little bit about the process of working on it.
So I have to drop out very soon, so I'll just do a reflection on overall making this acknowledgement. And for me, most of my pre-Sec 3 life, I always saw Canada as this very almost like a utopia. But I think that also comes a lot with just how our education system works. And so it was quite a hard hit when I learned more in depth about the atrocities committed against the Indigenous peoples. And ever since then, I feel like I've vowed to myself that I will be, to move forward, I feel like we need to learn about each other, about the past, and to hopefully grow new relationships and an understanding of each other's cultures. And so that reflects in my land acknowledgement, but it wasn't necessarily mine, because as you had mentioned earlier, multiple people worked on this acknowledgement. It wasn't only me and what I felt. We had a lot of little tweaks and turns done throughout the preparation. And I'd say that I spent maybe about 3.5 hours working on just pronunciation and understanding of the land acknowledgement. But yeah, so I have my economics class, so I have to be on my way, but have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for coming, Aiden. Thank you so much. So we could keep talking about it, but Ivan, I'll pass it over to you. I'm not sure if you envision questions right away or how this usually works.
I've got a bunch of questions. I'm sure the students, I think we'll go through all the panelists first. So make sure you have your questions written down and ready to bring forth when we're done with all three presentations. Thank you very much, Jen. Let's give a round of applause to Jen, to Aiden, and to
I have one thing. I have one thing to add.
Go for it.
Can I add one thing?
Most certainly.
I just want to share a website with everyone, which is called native-land.ca, and you type in your address and it shows you the traditional lands you're on. So this can be quite cool to do. So I'll just share that here, and yeah. And go to the Concordia website, because they have actually audio files for how to pronounce Jojage and Ganyagehaga. So how to say Mohawk and Montreal in the Ganyageha language. So a couple of little tips there. So on that note, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've learned something, and it's been a pleasure.
Jen, thank you so much. If possible, Hope, if you could, if it's okay with you to post your land acknowledgement in the chat, that would be great. If you can't, that's fine. And Jen, if you could possibly post the link to the beading workshop, I think some students would like to know. So if the link is easy to put there, or where they could find the link, that would be great. Thank you very much, Jen. Much appreciated. And we'll get back to you with some questions very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, Johanne Rabbat from Religious Studies, who will be talking to us about women and gender studies. Johanne, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. I look a bit like a blob, so I might have to apologize for that. Ivan's used to this in department meetings. I'm in a dark space, and it's really dark outside, so I had to put a brighter background. Thanks, Jen. Thank you, Aiden and Hope, for being here and for your contributions. I think some of what I'm going to say is probably related, or is definitely related to what was just said. I prepared a PowerPoint, so if any of my students are here, they'll recognize my style. This is how I do. So I'm going to go straight to the PowerPoint, and I would like to invite people, all the students here in the faculty, to contribute as I go along. That's also what I prefer, or you can save your questions for the end, but I will engage you today. So here we go with my PowerPoint. So you may recognize the logo. You may have seen it on pins. Those of you who were lucky enough to be in Dawson, we never thought we would say in this pandemic, we were lucky enough to be in school. But that is a privilege as well, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. I would encourage you to go to our Women's Gender Studies website if you're interested in anything that I'm saying today, and there's a lot more. I'm trying to rush along because I heard the 5 minutes, so I'm a little bit...
Johanne, take your time, my dear. Take your time.
Okay,
as much time as you want. Enjoy.
Okay, all right. So that word that I just mentioned, privilege. So let's talk about a privilege a little bit, because I think it ties in very nicely to the theme today, peace and other. So that's what I'd like to do. I would like you to close your eyes, if you will, and pretend that you're seated in a Dawson classroom right now. You've just walked in to class and you've picked, where would you like to sit? Where did you normally sit when you went into a Dawson classroom? Pretend that me or another teacher, pretend Ivan has just handed you a sheet of paper. You're seated, you've just received a sheet of paper. Ivan's just told you to crumple your sheet into a ball. So you're crumpling your sheet, imagine this. And imagine that this class, all of us here today, all 54 of us, represents this country's population. Imagine that there is a box at the front of the class, right near the blackboard on that table we have in front of the blackboard. And imagine that that box represents Canada and US, but the upper classes of Canada and the US. I hope you're with me so far. We're imagining we're back in school. Since we live in a land of opportunity, everyone will be given the chance to make it big and become wealthy by throwing their paper into the box. So you've got your crumpled paper in your hand. I will ask you, Ivan will ask you to toss that ball to the front of the class. Now, some of you are sitting on the left side, some of you are on the right side. Where are you situated in that class? But you want to make it to the upper class. So 3, 2, 1, you throw your ball into the box. You try to throw your ball into the box. Where did your ball land in your mind's eye? So let's open up our eyes, and can you tell me where your ball landed? Can I have some members of, I was going to say, of the audience of our class? So somebody put something in the chat. Where did their ball land? Let's see. Feel free to also use your mics. I have to extend my chat. Oh, I'm trying to see it. Oh, so you got it in the box. That's great. In the box. Anybody not get it in the box? Did anybody miss? Would anybody admit that they missed? Okay, Yakov, why did you miss?
I was in the back of the class, so I just figured it wouldn't go in.
Right. And somebody wrote, I love this one, Madeleine. Hi, Madeleine. Mine would have made it, but it got bumped by another one. I have to say, I think some of my students try to hit me on purpose. So I always move out of the way, and I'm just joking. Nobody's ever hit me yet. Oh, Ivan, somebody hit you. Somebody hit you. So a lot of people got it in the box. Okay. So do you know what this activity is meant to show? Let's see. I'm trying to close my chat window. Okay. So who had an advantage? So Yakov, why did yours land in the box, you said? Or didn't, rather?
Because I was in the back.
Because you were sitting at the back. When you walked into class, did you know Ivan was going to ask you to do this?
No.
You didn't know, right? So proximity to the box determines success or failure if you were going to be in the upper classes or the lower classes. So the closer you are to the box, fill in the blank. Anybody shout it out? The what of an advantage you had? More, it's easier. In the chat. Yeah, it was easier. The better odds you had, that means the more privilege you had of getting into that upper class. It's also possible in the back, is it? Could somebody in the back get it in the box? Is that possible? Could that happen? It could, right? It could, but let's say they were at a disadvantage. It was harder for them to get it in the box. So we know students in the front row had an advantage. They were probably unaware of the privilege they had when they walked into that classroom. You didn't know Ivan was going to ask you to do this, or else you may have changed your positioning, right? So because they sat a few feet between themselves and the box, the goal was very easy for them to achieve. It was already a given without being aware of it. What's the answer to this question as I check the chat? You have to be multimedia producers to work on Zoom these days. So okay, I was just looking at what some people said about where they got it in the box. So if anybody complained, where were those people sitting? Just shout it out. I'm good with that.
In the back.
They were sitting in the back, and I have a feeling that's what that person put in the chat. So they were sitting in the back, so students sitting in the back. So what can we say about this word that we bandy about so much these days about privilege? It's a right. It's an advantage or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. In this case, the people sitting in the front of the class, right? Maybe in a situation, you would have been punished for doing something, but you don't. You're granted immunity. Okay, so that's what we mean by a special right, advantage, or immunity. And I wanted to draw your attention to my first word on this slide, which is unearned access. You did absolutely nothing to earn your position in that box. What do you have access to? Resources mean a lot of different things. Doesn't just mean money, right? Only available to some people. Why? Because they're part of an advantaged social group. They're members of that group. So I think you can see where I'm going with this. Too bad we couldn't do the ball tossing, the paper tossing exercise in person. I'm going to go to the whiteboard. Let's do it. Whiteboard throwdown, as I like to call it here. So I'm going to ask you to put down different different statuses or different, how could I put it? Membership to certain groups. You annotate. Do you know how to use the whiteboard? You click on annotate in, was it view? I have a different window than you, but if you click on your toolbar or you click on annotate, sorry, what did I just do? My whiteboard disappeared. I'm gonna go back to the whiteboard, okay. Hang on, I have to do this again because this happens on Zoom. It's one of the hazards of online teaching. Connections, excellent. Can you give me more, not situations, but unearned, not unearned, but what situation in life would you have where that would affect your privilege? So connections with people, very, very good. Connections can get you places, right? Jobs. I see other people trying to write. You could put it in the chat, we'll help you. Oh, inheritance, if you inherit. You know, newcomers to this country didn't have the benefit of having these inheritances where they could purchase things, right? If you came money, very good. That's economic status, by the way. What else would give you an advantage or disadvantage? Doing well so far. I see something in the chat. There's so much more we could put down here. Let me see. Yeah, so whether you have your nationality can determine it. Very good. Let me go to the bottom of the chat again. This chat's getting a little bit long. Someone said race. Okay, someone said race, skin color. Let's put it on our board. I'm trying to put it on our board now, but I can't. I don't know why. Let me try again. Job title, race, skin color. Okay, anything else? Country of birth, very good. Your age, absolutely. Your nationality, can you give me more? Your sexual orientation, very good. I'm putting skin color down. Do you have anything else you want to put down? Now I can't close my chat window because something else is in the way. Skin color, yeah, and let me go back. Generation, say, okay, housing, your housing situation, abilities and disabilities, gender and sex, love it. Okay, age is there. Sorry, I have to get rid of my chat somehow so that I can see the whole board. Education, level of education, your mother tongue, very important, okay? Is there any interpersonal relationships? Well, that's interesting. Yeah, how close you are to a person or how not close, social status, great. Your appearance, do you match the beauty standard, right? Excellent. It can be height. Your family situation, good. Can you tell me what you mean by that, the person who wrote family situation?
I said it. It's like, for example, some people, if they have, I don't know, divorced parents or toxic parents, they might have disadvantage compared to people who have like a not toxic environment that they live in.
You're absolutely right. What about divorced parents? What about violence in the home? Okay, weight. Cal wrote, I saw Cal, what you wrote a moment ago. I'm trying to find it, Cal. Where's your thing? It was good. Health. Are you a healthy person? Generally, you have no health issues? Yes, that affects it, okay? Your weight, your mental health, not just your physical health. right? Immigration status from the chat. Thank you for helping me out. There's a lot going on now on the chat, right? And you're all right. You're all right. Someone wrote your experience, your early experiences in life. That could be in the home, that could be in other places, right? In school systems. Okay, you did a great job. I'm going to stop sharing. I think we covered all of these, and you're absolutely right. You did really, really well. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So I have a chart here. I think it's on my next slide. These social identity categories, which a lot of you mentioned, we mentioned race. I don't think anybody mentioned sex so much. So your biological sex, I'm not sure I saw that. Gender may have been mentioned. Your orientation, your sexual orientation, your social class, your level of ability or disability, whether it be mental health issues or physical, your religion. I didn't see that. You have 2 members of the religion, 3 members of the religion department with you here. And when you look at, you remember this? Bill 21, which seemed to discriminate against certain religions, but not just the religions, certain genders within that religion. And age was there. We could add to this. And you found some good ones. So who's the privileged group when it comes to race, generally in our society? Just yell it out. I'm good with that.
White.
Yeah. Sex, who's advantaged? We have it in the chat too. Could somebody help me out maybe and monitor the chat? It's hard to operate the PowerPoint. Okay, I can check it too. Sex, who's advantaged? And I don't mind if you, yeah?
Men, male.
Yeah, biological men. Very good. What's on our next category? I'm trying to leave the chat open at the same time. I don't know where to put it. Gender is?
It's gender men.
Yeah, it's male, right? Here we have gender conforming. This is not my chart. And you're going to see this is an American chart, and they're going to be clues that give away that this is an American chart. Sexual orientation, well, heterosexual people. Can you tell me what class is disadvantaged? I'm looking at the chat too, trying to go all the way to the bottom.
Gay or lesbian?
For the class. So we're talking about economics.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So lower categories.
Yeah. So the richer or upper is advantage, lower is disadvantage. Ability, well.
Able-bodied people.
Absolutely. Okay. And you know what's funny here? They put temporarily able-bodied because as we get older, that may change. Religion. This is the States though, but you can think Quebec. We can tailor it to us.
Probably Catholics.
Yes, but here it says Protestants because although there are a lot of Catholics in the States, but anyway, you know what I mean. So Christian, age, who's advantaged? Are babies, do babies have an advantage in our society? Do the elderly? Someone wrote middle-aged, let's see. Adults, okay? So I'm going to skip right to the other side of the board. We're not going to go through this. Discrimination against race is called? We're going to get to the isms, yeah?
Racism.
And that's right. And the targeted groups, you can see this is American because it says Asian, Black, Latino, and Native people. But in our case, we're going to say Indigenous people. We're going to look at the violence against Asian Americans and Asian American women in the past week in particular. And did you know that Indigenous women, Indigenous people are more subject to violence? The rates are much higher. Who's at a disadvantage in terms of sex? Well, let's look at the counter opposite bio women. Somebody said with gender before, transgender. Here you see these terms are almost, we can add to this group, right? We can add to this group. LGBTQ plus fits in here. Sexual orientation, well, here again, we can add to this whole category, the poor, the working class, disadvantaged, people with disabilities. Now, religion is interesting because it's an American chart and it's from 2007. It says Jews, Muslims, and Hindus. I think we can expand this a little bit, all right? We can expand this. And then the age are the elderly. Look at what's happened with the CHSLDs and the elderly and the neglect. We don't value elders, something we see in Indigenous traditions and in other cultures. In the West, we do not, right? And I think you all understand that. And obviously, younger people are dependent. on a lot of things, right? Very young children are dependent. So, and then we've got the isms. So someone said racism before, sexism, transgender. Okay, you've got all the isms. Ableism, in case you didn't know, against disadvantaged people if they're not able-bodied, all of this. Okay, ageism. So when I asked you to read this 5 pages by Roxane Gay, Roxane Gay talks about her own privileges, but she also recognizes she doesn't have certain privileges. And that was very interesting to read, you know. She said, when I went to Haiti with my family, I realized, wow, I had a lot of privileges, but I'm Black and I'm a woman. So I recognize that there are a lot of privileges I don't have. How she defines privilege is exactly how we've said, through race, through gender, heterosexual privilege, economic, we've said it. At some point, she says, you have to surrender to the kinds of privilege you hold. Now, does that mean you feel guilty about it? Maybe. That happens, right? Nearly everyone, she says, in the developed world has someone or something else someone else doesn't, yearns for. And that's true. Now, for a long time, one of the privileges women didn't have is the right to vote. Look at my chart. These are, on the left, which you can't see right now, are Canadian provinces. In your second row is the years that women got the right to vote. And in the third row is where women had the right to be a candidate in an election. So out of these years, what's our range? What's our range? So the earliest right to vote was, you tell me, I've just found it. Somebody yell it out.
1916.
Yes. What is the latest women obtain the right to vote in Canada?
1940.
Correct. Where does Quebec, pick a date, any date, where does Quebec figure on this list? Are we 1916, 17, 19, 22, 25? Where does Quebec figure? How did you know that?
I learned it in history class.
Okay, you're right. You're right. We were the last province to grant women the right to vote in Quebec. So, you know, things to ponder. So can you tell me what some of the issues of interest would be? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to neglect you on the chat. The chat I'm so happy you're participating and you're engaged in this. So good history class, Cal says to that student, good history class. What do you think the issues are besides issues, political issues that we're interested in women's gender studies? Notice it's not just women's. We made sure we put gender in the title as well. Somebody's answered. Oh, someone said just general knowledge. Yeah, good history course, but general knowledge. Tell me some of the issues of interest we would be interested in looking in when we study gender.
Bodily autonomy.
Okay, very good. Can I have more? What do we want to look at in society?
Equal pay.
Very good. Equal pay. Give me more.
Equal education opportunities.
Very good. Give me more. You're doing very well.
Equal job opportunities.
Yes. So equal, not just equal pay, but equal job opportunities. Someone wrote equal rights in the chat. Someone wrote violence. You're doing really well. Do you want to add a couple before I show you my list? You're doing well.
I would say equal respect and safety.
Very good. Issues of safety and respect. Body rights. Oh, I like that. Okay. So let's look at our list. So I've got patriarchy, a term bandied about a lot. Somebody explain patriarchy.
So like a male-dominated society?
Yeah, where men hold the balance of power. Very good. Issues of femininity and masculinity. What is it to be feminine? Is it to speak with a soft voice? Is it to giggle? Is it to wear skirts? Is it to wear nail polish? Is it to be masculine, to be stoic and strong? What are these issues? Okay, what are we being projected in society? And what do different cultures believe? When I went to Tokyo, I really noticed these issues of femininity and masculinity. Sexuality, very important, right? Does your biology equal your destiny is another question. Yes, Rubeida. Yeah,
yes, I wanted, oh, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that women are considered back then they were like objects of desire for men because of their beauty standards. Everybody, it's like if you try to do something else, for example, you try to be a bit more masculine, you would confuse men and they would be a bit frustrated because they don't like what they're seeing.
Well, that is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about these issues. What is it to be feminine and masculine, and what's acceptable? Is it okay for a man to cry, or is that a sign of weakness?
Sign of weakness before.
For many, but not for everybody. Not for everybody, right? And it's cultural, isn't it? Would you agree? It's so cultural, right? So I could tell you what I saw in Japan, but that's another discussion. Maybe we could talk about it later, those of you who've been to Japan. Marriage and oppression, okay? So is that your only option? Is there violence in the home, domestic violence? Did you hear that with COVID, the domestic violence rates are really high? Do you know how many homicides we normally have in the city? I forget if it's in Quebec or in the city a year. How many homicides do we usually have in a year? Take a guess. Someone said a male-dominated system and stereotypes. Yes, echo. Take a guess. Give me a number.
25.
Like 36.
Okay, it's like some of you said 35, 20. It's 10. We've had 9 homicides, women, in the last 9 weeks, in as many weeks. Did you hear about the person who killed himself and his wife in the cab just a few days ago? The rates of domestic violence right now with COVID are really, it's a big problem. Not the vice premier, but I forget her name. She just held a press conference 2 days ago where she talked about trying to have people report domestic violence. It's very complicated. Reproduction, reproductive rights, the right to abortion, the right to birth control. Do you have control over your own body? Is it legislated? How are women's bodies viewed? And you mentioned this, equal pay, equal education, equal opportunities. So did you hear about the figures with International Women's Day on what the gender, the gap is, the pay gap? So we have, it's legislated that men and women, if you look at my slide here, but the Canadian Human Rights Commission mentions that it's illegal to pay equity is going against pay equity is illegal. So that's what it says here. But what we have is a gender wage gap for many, many years now. And it tells you in 2019, women owned 88 cents for every dollar that a man owned. So if a man made, $10,000 a year, what would a woman make? Well, they make more, but what would a woman make? Who's good at mental math?
88,000?
88,000. Oh, somebody looked up in 2019, the recorded number of homicides was 45. Okay. Well, the article that I read said, I know that we've had 9 in the last little while. I don't know why it said 10. Maybe that was for 2020 or something. Yeah, 88,800, right? So when you graduate Dawson, those of you who are women, I have some bad news for you. Women earn on average 12% less than men in the year after graduating university. 5 years after graduating, men make 25% more money annually. Your wage gap increases after, yeah, you're going like this. I'm sorry. So, in 2020, I wanted to make you aware of another fact. So it's not, women aren't, quote, just women. We're not just from a gender. We have a sexual orientation. We come from we hold nationalities. We have a certain skin tone and features, right? We are perhaps taller, shorter. We are bigger or smaller. We are an agglomeration of many factors. So not just if you're a woman, you make less money. If you're an Indigenous woman, according to the Canadian Women's Foundation, you make 65 cents on the dollar. If you're a woman living with a disability, you make 54 cents. If you're racialized, what does that mean? We hear that term a lot these days. What's a racialized woman? I find it a bit of a weird term, and I am a racialized woman. What is that? I don't know if I like that term to refer to myself, but that's what scholars are using.
Is it coming from another country?
It's being a member of a visible minority. You're racialized. Yes, exactly. We used to say visible minority. Now they've changed. The terms always get updated because people aren't happy with them. So, and then women who are immigrants make 71 cents, okay, on the dollar. So I think you get the idea here. And then you have more stats here, okay, which we've just mentioned. But the reason I brought this clip up here is because domestic violence has risen. And this is what this is telling you. It says how COVID is affecting women job-wise, and it explains it because often they're unpaid caregivers, you see? And then we talked about the domestic violence. And it says 2.1 million Canadians have applied for unemployment since March 15th, when the pandemic started a year ago. So what are the figures in 2021? Just released, 82 cents for every dollar. So it hasn't, doesn't look very good. Okay, so I'm going to go through some other things with you today. The racial wage gap, we just talked about different races, but can you tell me what this is representing on my image? What am I trying to convey on this image?
Can I go?
Yeah.
Is it like a woman being uncomfortable? Like basically if she goes inside this elevator, she will be watched and overlooked by all the men?
You're getting there. Yes. Yes.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Probably represents a feeling of an outsider in a society where the dominant voice is for men.
Very good. Let's take it further. Yes.
Can I add that the doors are closing and the elevator is going up, and she's
very good.
left on the ground floor.
You're right. So what are we trying to represent here? It seems to be a work environment. So what are we trying to represent? Someone says, I won't feel happy entering in that elevator. It doesn't look safe. Well, you know, we can't argue with you, can we? That's how you would feel, right? That's how you would feel. You know, when I asked women in my class, how many women have been followed by men? Most of the women in my class raised their hand. Most of them raised their hand. But this is about an elevator going up and a racialized woman being left behind, and it's going up and they're all wearing suits and ties. What are we meant to be showing you?
The lack of respect for them.
Talk about the job market.
Lack of equality.
In what way?
In that the men there seem to be all white, dominant figures, and obviously probably upper class.
Could be, sure. They're definitely working in those, and the elevator's going up. What does that mean?
Means that they're going to leave
opportunities.
Lack of opportunities. Have you heard of the glass ceiling? So that's the power gap, right? So what is the glass ceiling? You see this image here? And why is it made of glass? It's a term that is used to describe, someone said being marginalized. The ceiling is above our heads, right? This woman is climbing up. Can she go past the ceiling? She can't.
Is it that she can see other people going past the ceiling?
She can see other people going past, but she can't. But why is the ceiling, why is the ceiling made of glass?
Maybe it's because like based on like how you break the glass, like it has a way, like you need to, it's kind of like metaphor, like how you like approach the way to being like getting higher, but like it depends on your methods.
Well, I would say partly right, but somebody wrote in the chat, see, she can see her opportunities, but can't reach it. I love this. Scuddy, this is great, because of invisible obstacles. And Scuddy goes on to say that we all know about, they are visible but not physical at the same time. These obstacles are intangible. So it's a ceiling. Is a company going to say, sorry, we just don't let women at the presidential level? That's our policy. Are they going to say that? Is it written? It's an unwritten policy, but the studies show that it's very much there. We can see it. It's invisible though. We can kind of see it, we know it, but it's invisible. Fragile situation. So ceiling limiting upward advancements, not allowing women in upper management. It's glass. And how many women are CEOs? Not a lot, okay? The limitation is not immediately, let me move my toolbar, apparent, and is normally an unwritten and unofficial policy, because then they'd be going against rules, wouldn't they? So even though we have that and we have legislation, like one of my students said, why aren't men and women paid equally? Don't we have laws against that? Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're followed, right? What I asked my students to tell me about a situation of bias, and I didn't tell them anything else. Most of them mentioned bias in their workplaces. Think of your own workplaces, okay? Think of your own workplaces. So you saw in that last slide, men dramatically outnumber, outrank, and out-earn women, okay? And this is, the Globe and Mail did a big study on this. They received a lot of flack from universities who didn't have women in upper management. They looked at many, many Canadian universities and they put out a study, and those universities didn't like what the study had to say, which is very few women in upper management. And this is what this is telling you. I'm going to move on. Okay. So what we're saying is supervisors, managers, senior managers, directors, executive vice president, those tend to be men, and more men are earning 6 figures than women. And this is a Globe and Mail study. I have all the references. Now, when George Floyd died, was killed, and many other incidents took place around this, and incidents have been taking place for years, we heard this term a lot. Systemic racism. Can you tell me in your own words, we don't have to read this, what systemic racism is? What do we mean by systemic? Why do we call it systemic racism? Hope.
Because it's the racism within the system.
That's right. Give me an example of systems.
There's the healthcare system.
Excellent. Joyce Echaquan, does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Do you know who Joyce, can you tell us who Joyce Echaquan is and what happened to her? Hope?
She was someone that was of a minority group, First Nations, if I remember correctly. And she was murdered by the people who are supposed to be looking after her.
Who were?
Nurses and doctors, and possibly carried, that's the term I know from BC. It's like auxiliary, really long word.
Yeah, orderlies, right?
Orderlies, that's short, yes.
Yes, so nurses were, she was subject to racist comments by nurses and doctors. They did not take her pain seriously. She filmed it on her cell phone and she died. And this is something we see, and I'm sure it's covered, Hope, in the certificate that you're doing. You can't separate what our certificates are doing from one another, peace and decolonization, indigenization. So someone wrote, in my job, men are allowed to wear joggings and comfortable clothes, but women are not even allowed to wear jeans, and we are criticized for whatever we wear. And because it should be classy, quote unquote. Okay, there's a lot we could say about that. Thank you for sharing that. Someone says what the Constitution imposes on minorities. Right, constitutional judicial systems are systems. Educational systems are systems. Systemic racism. It's the racism that exists within these systems. They're embedded. And we've heard this term a lot. Now, as human beings, do you just have one privilege or one lack of privilege? They overlap, right? You saw that list. You're not, quote unquote, just a man with disabilities. You're a Muslim man with disabilities. You're a Muslim poor man with do you understand what I'm saying? They all mesh together. We are an agglomeration of that. And that's what we call, someone else is sharing an experience. All female hires at my job are immediately hired as cashiers when they handle clientele, whereas men are hired to stock shelves. Some men would much rather work as cashiers. I would rather stock shelves, says a woman. Same for me, somebody just said. You know, one student told me in her experiences of bias that A man she worked with, he wanted to work at the jewelry counter at the department store. Not allowed. That's where he wanted to. You are not allowed. They put him in, I think they put him in the sports department or something really cliche. Oh, everybody's weighing in on the chat. Same here, same here. I want to stock. I don't want to be a cashier. Okay, so when you look at this chart, you can see if you follow a line. So let's take a line, okay? So if you're heterosexual on that line of privilege, and then you're in the position of domination, follow the line, and then you end up with LGBTQ plus at the disadvantage at the other end of the spectrum. It's just a little oppression, a little chart here on privilege. I want to let the person who coined the term intersectionality speak to you rather than me, Kimberly Crenshaw, on what intersectionality is. Ivan, is that okay? Am I going on too long?
It's all good, Jill. Go for it.
Okay, so let me play that. Let's new share and go on this little video for you. 2 minutes, it's not very long, but she can say it better than I can.
We cannot hear.
No audio.
Sorry, sorry. You're right. Sorry. I have to click something else. So I'm going to do that. Okay, hang on. Now I lost my window. One of the hazards of Zoom. Let me get it back. Okay. Here we go. I have to click 3 things for you to hear the video. Okay, let me do this again. And I lost my other window, but I'm sure Ivan is familiar with this because it happens to all of us during class. Your teachers are wielding lots and lots of different technologies and platforms that we've had to learn, a lot of us, because we weren't familiar with all of them. Okay, now I've got the thing opening, and I will share sound. I don't know why they don't make it so that you share your window and sound at the same time. You have to click 2 other things besides share. Okay, so now you've disappeared. Where's my Zoom? Sorry, this is, one of the hazards, as I said. So I will do that. Bear with me. I hope you're hanging on to your questions as they pop up. I'm trying to locate my Zoom window again, which is completely gone. Karina, I wish you could help me with, okay, no, here, I found it.
You found it?
Yeah, it minimized itself. Okay, sorry. Usually it's so seamless. Okay, share sound and go. Thank you for letting me know, by the way. Kimberly Crenshaw on intersectionality.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identities. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
Okay, So she coined the term intersectionality. She doesn't have a monopoly on it, but she's definitely coined that term. So I'm going to go back. I hope I haven't lost you. Can you let me know you're still with me? Can you give us a thumbs up? Yes, literal thumbs up and virtual thumbs up. This is an important term when we talk about women's and gender studies and all of our certificates. So it's just the interconnection between race, class, gender, and all of those things. What I have my students do when I talk about privilege is to fill in a privilege questionnaire and also to watch a video, but we're not going to do that. Have any of you seen the privilege exercise where you take one step forward or one step back? You've seen it? So some of the questions on the questionnaire that my students fill in are, if your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take a step back. It's a disadvantage. Are you able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault? Well, that's great. You can take a step forward. A lot of us are not. Take a step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, you can go forward or you take a step back. Have you been diagnosed with a physical or mental illness or a disability? That's a disadvantage for you if you have. And this is American again, you can see language issues. So my students said we should substitute French for English in the province. But you know, that's up for debate, right? If the primary language spoken in your household growing up was not French or English, take a step back. So that's what I would have my students do. We're going to end soon. I just wanted to point to your reading again. Thank you for being attentive and for participating. I want to end on a more hopeful sort of a video, but when Roxane Gay writes, we tend to believe that accusations of privilege imply we have it easy, which we resent because life is hard for nearly everyone. Of course we resent these accusations. Look at white men when they're accused of having privilege. They tend to be immediately defensive and at times understandably so. They say, it's not my fault I'm a white man, or I'm whatever position, instead of simply accepting that in regard to this, they benefit, yes, from certain privileges. To have privilege in one or more areas does not mean you are wholly privileged. Surrendering to the acceptance of privilege is difficult, but it's all that is expected. What I remind myself regularly is this: the acknowledgement of my privilege is not a denial of the ways I have been and am marginalized, the ways I have suffered. And Peggy McIntosh in the 80s started talking about white privilege when she was studying gender. And she said, you know what? I was studying gender and I realized that it was more about privilege in general than it was about gender. And she calls all of these things we carry with us, the way we look, the language we speak, the religion we practice, the country we're from, our sexual orientations, if we have a different, issues of femininity and masculinity, she says, I call that an invisible knapsack that we carry with us at all times. It can act as a passport to get you certain privileges, but it can also act as a drawback. So I wanted to mention that, and to coming to the end here, what she says in this paragraph for me is important for you, because I wanted to choose what I thought would be important for you and us today. Disapproving of the system won't be enough to change it. Individual acts can palliate, but cannot end these problems. What will we do with our knowledge, with our privilege? As we know from watching men, it's an open-ended question, whether we will choose to use unearned advantage and whether we will use any of our arbitrarily awarded power and privilege to try to reconstruct power systems. Are you, all of you, let me get a good look at you, put you on the gallery view. Are you all going to use the privileges you do have to help those who don't? Are you willing to give up some of your privilege if it means giving those who don't some privilege, right? What do we do with all this? What do we do if you're a white male? Do we want you to feel guilty? No, that's not going to solve anything. Is it about blaming settlers or white males? No, not at all, okay? But often white male, we call settlers because they're white, okay, would come into my class and say, but what can I do? First, there's a defensiveness. Well, I didn't know. You didn't settle in New France and oppress Indigenous people in 1534. No, you didn't. You weren't there. You didn't come over with Christopher Columbus in 1492 and enslave a bunch of people living in the Dominican Republic, okay? You didn't do that. But there are things you can do to accomplish things in terms of privilege. You use your own privilege to help those who don't, because you have a lot if you are from those privileged groups. And this is how we end. And then I have a little video that maybe gives us a little bit of hope, but you'll see. You don't necessarily have to do anything once you acknowledge your privilege. You don't have to apologize for it. You need to understand the extent of your privilege, the consequences of your privilege, and remain aware that people who are different from you move through and experience the world in ways you might never know anything about. They might endure situations you can never know anything about. You could, however, use that privilege for the greater good, to try to level the playing field for everyone, to work for social justice, to bring attention to how those without certain privileges are disenfranchised. We've seen what the hoarding of privilege has done, and the results are shameful. And I will end on this video, I promise. This is the end, because it's short, but it's really poignant, okay? And I think it sums things up really well. So please allow me these last 3 minutes to share this with you. I think it's here. Sound is on, very good. Let's go to the next video and end on this. Here we go.
Who's half black, half white, but looks white. Blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together. So they're first cousins, and it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day, and Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me, and she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who's a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? This is a nice day today. They're just chatting up, and says, yeah. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just a little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10, notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you got to choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over. And she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been. She goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the 2 white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman. And it's totally unacceptable. At which point the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds. She goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege. And even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, "This is unfair. Why are you doing this to me?" Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
That's what you can do every single day. I love to play that for my students, and I was very happy to be able to play that for you today. And that's how I want to end off. So thank you so much for being so great with your engagement and for joining me today. I'm really, really interested in hearing what you have to say to both what Jen presented and what Hope and Aiden said and what was said here. So I apologize for taking more time than allotted. Yeah, I can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. That was fantastic. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. We have very little time. I think we've got some 10 minutes left. So I'm going to give a very brief, condensed Reader's Digest version.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. It was fantastic, and I think very important. And you know, as far as my students are concerned, they hear me spiel off all the time. So it's great that they get to hear you and Jen share what you have to share. So I'm going to present on the Peace Studies Certificate. The Peace Certificate at Dawson, the Peace Center at Dawson, all the peace initiatives at Dawson really began with the shooting that happened in 2006. It was a horrible event, and what the college tried to do is to do something positive or beneficial given this horrible event. Faire un bien à partir d'un mal, as they say. One image that strikes me from that time is people brought flowers to the college. And so every entrance to the college had mounds of flowers. And so people were like, well, what do we do with them? So there was this, well, we throw them away, but it seemed a little insensitive to throw away the flowers that were donated in relation to this horrific event. So it was decided to create the Peace Garden. So the Peace Garden in the northwest corner of the Dawson grounds, that soil was enriched by all the love and kindness, compassion of those flowers. All those flowers were buried and became part of the soil in which the Peace Garden was grown. So that's something to keep in mind. Another event that is important to me, at least personally, I was doing my master's at Concordia when the shooting happened, and we heard people screaming in the streets, and I'm in the library and like, what's going on? And I look up at the screen and we see cop cars and we see the yellow ribbons and Dawson is being shut down. Oh, there's a shooting at Dawson. I remember I had to do some sort of reflection, and part of me was saying, what am I doing this reflection on Hindu mysticism when people are getting shot down the street? This was kind of what was going on in my mind. On the news at that time, they were talking about putting in metal detectors at Dawson. So, okay, Dawson shooting, we're going to put in metal detectors. Can you imagine what it would be like to have metal detectors at every entrance at Dawson? How that would affect the culture, Dawson's culture. And I was thinking that would be the worst thing that could ever be done, would be to put in these metal detectors. What a horrible idea. A few days later, however much time after the fact, Dawson decides, it's on the news, Dawson decides not to put in metal detectors, and rather than put in metal detectors, the Directeur Général, or DG at the time, Richard Filion, stood out in front of the school himself on de Maisonneuve and greeted the students back. So for me, this was absolutely brilliant, and I gained a lot of respect for this person, Richard, and he maintained my respect over the years, that not only did he not put in this artificial barrier, on the contrary, he put himself on the line. He put his own skin in the game. He put, I'm not putting in metal detectors, I'm putting myself there instead to greet the students back. And I think this is kind of part of the inspiration that began all the peace movement at Dawson. Another kind of aspect that actually influenced this course is Monsieur Filion. Over the summer, he was a big reader over the summer. It was always interesting to speak with him at the end of the summer and see what he had read. He read a book called Les Tisserands by a French Muslim philosopher, Abdenour Bidar. And he actually brought Abdenour Bidar to Montreal to speak, and he spoke at a bunch of radio stations and such. And so I attended this the talk in 5B16. And his book, Les Tisserands, had 3 parts to it. Weaving, les tisserands, those who weave, weaving a piece with oneself, weaving a piece with community and others, and weaving a piece with nature. And that, I heard that lecture just as I was developing this course as part of the Learning Communities Initiative, and I said, bingo, exactly. That's how we're going to structure this course, peace and self, peace and other, peace and nature. And now you're experiencing that. So you're starting to see kind of the lineage, the history that led to this course that you are now participating in. So the Peace Center was created, the Peace Garden was created, the Peace Certificate was created, and all of this was brought into Dawson's strategic plan, meaning that peace and the idea of peace was of not supreme, but of significant importance in Dawson's culture. And so resources would be dedicated to peace initiatives at Dawson. And if you feel this vibe at Dawson, if you feel a sense of belonging, that is kind of influenced by all of these events. Another thing that Monsieur Filon told me one year at the end of the summer, he's like, we're talking about students, young people, and what is affecting them most negatively nowadays. And he said, alienation. And that struck me. And having traveled, there's a certain thing, as a traveler, you start to become someone who's willing to talk to their neighbor. Seeing as you're on the road, you don't really know anyone, it kind of becomes almost natural to go, hey, how are you today? How's your day? And just to talk to people you don't know. If you go into the metro or anywhere nowadays, most people just stay in their bubble. So I'm bringing this up. We're going to be going back to school soon. And even if we're not going back soon, this idea that alienation is a great, is kind of a disaster to our culture. And we could relate it back to the young man, the disturbed young man who committed the shooting. Did he do that because he felt alienated? Did he feel himself to be other? Was he not included? Was he pushed out? Was he marginalized? And is that what pushed him to this drastic act? When it comes to peace in the world, I think it all starts with ourselves. And when it comes to alienation, the first thing that we can do is to be friendly, is to reach out to others and to try and create connections. Even with all the masks and such, I wave to people randomly. I try and give people compliments on the street. I just try to throw out some kindness, some friendliness, some sort of humor into the world, kind of as a contribution. Those of you who have taken Intro to World Religions with me, I like to think of all of us as co-creators, co-chefs. We're all cooking this soup together, and we're all eating the same soup. So the question then becomes, what ingredients are you putting in this soup that we are all eating? And so this becomes peace and self. And in terms of alienation, this is peace and other. How do we relate to other people? We've all felt lonely. We've all suffered. We've all felt marginalized to a certain extent. So knowing that others feel the same way, engaging in a certain compassion and empathy, then reaching out to them. And peace and nature. Obviously, the world is facing a climate change. Heck, without nature, there is no us. And the question of peace becomes academic because we won't be here to contemplate or to try and enact peace because we won't have any air to breathe and we're all going to die. So peace with nature is really foundational to peace with other or peace with self. I guess I'll conclude with this notion. For those of you who've taken Intro to World Religions with me, the question that we try to answer is, does religion evolve? And I see religion as a mirror of society, and religion will change depending on socio-political realities over time. So by asking ourselves, does religion evolve, is asking ourselves, does society evolve? And part of that whole, we look at the hero's journey and we kind of consider the human journey as a hero's journey, to see humanity as a super organism and to see ourselves and our hero's journey as being a fractal representation, as being connected to this hero's journey of humanity writ large as a super organism. And what I like to try and believe, I guess, or the way I try to see it is that, yes, there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world. The genocide that was perpetrated on the indigenous peoples of the Americas, a horrible event. The way that women have been treated historically and continue to be disenfranchised in modern day society is a horrible event. I like to see these as our teen years, as our zit-ridden years. This is when we're full of pus and we're very confused and we don't know what's going on. But I have hope that as long as we continue to make efforts like Jen and all her collaborators, like Joanne and all her collaborators, everyone's invested in the peace certificate. This is us working our way out of our adolescence through awareness, through critical understanding, through compassion, and through empathy. And my great hope is, thanks to these certificates and thanks to the efforts that all of us here are making, we will work our way out of these troubled teen years into some sort of fruitful, harmonic, young adulthood in which all of us can flourish and be. So I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we have time. Oh my goodness, are we out of time? Thank you so much for listening. Let's at least field one question for Jen and one question for Joanne, please. If anyone has a question for Jen, please shoot. No questions for Jen? I have a question for Jen. Jen, this is not related exactly to what you were talking about, but I think it's important in the sense that I think a lot of young people say, well, I'm a settler, and I think this all, it kind of relates to privilege as well. It's like, what do you mean I'm a settler? I didn't come here and kill anybody. I didn't invade anybody's land. You know, I didn't do anything to anyone. So why am I being put into this settler box? Is that could you answer that question?
I think we need a whole other piece and other session to talk about that, but it does tie in. It does tie into what Joanne was talking about regarding privilege, is knowing where you come from and showing an awareness of yourself is actually part of being better able to understand other people and your relationship to them. So I'll say that for now, but this is a big topic, and often it takes people years to kind of work through, you know, terms that seem negative, and but actually, you know, it's very helpful when people know how they fit into things. So yeah, so another session on that. But you're right to point out that a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that label, and that means that's a sign that learning needs to start. Okay, so if you feel like guilt, shame, frustration with that, that's a sign. Get learning, and there's an invitation to learn. I've seen this in presentations where people have spoken up about this, like, well, I don't want to teach this topic because I feel guilty. And the, you know, Indigenous presenter at the time was like, get reading. Yeah, you're here today, you're learning, get reading. So that's my answer to that.
Excellent. I actually, I'm going to follow it up with a second question for you, Jen, just because it's on the top of my mind and it's more related to what you said. How do we go from having a land acknowledgement that's box ticking to something that actually has agency in the world?
Well, I think partly by, like the example we saw today with Hope, and Aiden had also a land acknowledgement where they're made personal and they're connected to the event at hand. So when Hope talked about, you know, thinking about, well, this is a beading workshop, I want to, you know, feel excited, and there's all kinds of learning, right? Learning about art, learning about missing and murdered Indigenous women, learning about domestic violence, learning about thriving cultures and music. It makes sense that the land acknowledgements should, you know, be thought through, and that whoever is opening those events thinks about it and connects to it. At the same time, a land acknowledgement shouldn't be so long that it takes over the time of the people who are there to speak, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes I've seen land acknowledgements very short, like, you know, saying the land that the presenter is on, and sometimes people will put it in a PowerPoint on the slide opening the meeting and then drop that nativeland.ca, like wherever you are, especially in these pandemic times, people are everywhere, know where you are and have a look. So, and also I think it's really important for us Montrealers, those of us in Tiohtià:ke, to practice those pronunciations of how to say Mohawk, so Tiohtià:ke, and how to say Montreal or Tiohtià:ke, and to have those at the ready. I think that's a very small step, and it's very intimidating to pronounce new sounds and new words, and to show that vulnerability and to expose that you're learning is very meaningful to the audience. Very, very, very meaningful to the audience to show and be very transparent about the fact that you're a learner and an awareness, and also showing that desire and vulnerability to be learning. So yeah, thank you for those questions.
Thank you so much, Jen. It reminds, there's the Strunk and White elements of style. They say, don't compound ignorance with inaudibility. So if you can't pronounce it right, just say it loud, say it proud, and somebody will correct you, and that way you'll learn. Thank you so very much, Jen. That's awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Joanne? Mia.
So you showed in your video ways in which we can use our privilege to help people that are underprivileged in our community. And one way that I've seen people using their privilege is online through social media, reposting, sharing content, or elevating the voices of other people. However, with this, I feel like there comes the fear of only engaging in online activism. And I've seen this label performative activism come up. So I'm wondering how you feel about that. Do you think that only engaging in online can risk not contributing in other more meaningful ways? And do you think that that activism is not good enough? Is any activism good enough? And if performative activism is a danger, how can social media users avoid engaging in it? Sorry, that was that's like 4 questions. Sorry.
I think you're muted, Joy. There we go.
Yeah, I was muted. It's a great set of questions, and it's important. So what students do when they come up to me after we have an event is, what can I do? And that's what you're addressing right now. And what students ask presenters when they come to Dawson, whether it's Social Science Week, for those of you who are new to Dawson, we had a lot of conferences going on. I hate to also, I missed that. And the students will go right to the mic at the end and say, what can we do? And I don't find that all presenters are really ready for that question. But what I would say is, no, I don't believe online activism is sufficient, because we've still had that going on for a few years now, but we're still seeing there are changes. But I believe performance activism, to me, speaks very loud, and it may reach less people, but in conjunction with online, it can have a far-reaching effect. So what my students told me with our Women's Day event, where we had 2 Indian women speak about safety, not just in India, but about not seeing women as victims of sexual violence, but seeing women as agents, they did something as simple as standing outside amongst men. That was one of the performance activism acts that they did. And my students were struck by that, because it's so simple to stand amongst men and look them in the eye, but it had a far-reaching effect. And it also had an effect on my students, and it inspired the certificate students who were there. It inspired them, because when you see somebody do it, it's just like the grocery store incident. Maybe you won't take the initiative, but it doesn't take much sometimes to get you involved, And so I don't know if that answers the question. I think it's a combination of both is needed. They have to work together. You can't negate social media these days. It's a huge factor in your lives, and it reaches so many people. So I think awareness is key. And like Jen was saying, it's to be aware, but you've got to do something about, whether doing is a land acknowledgement or saying, hey, that's not okay, because you're in a position of power. The manager listened to those white women. Hey, what's going on, because if you're from a minority group and you're complaining, it's there they go again. There they go again, complaining. That's what it is. If you're a woman wearing a hijab and you're complaining, there they go again. It doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us, it's not that it doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us to where we want to be at this stage. And when you look at the activism from the 50s and how far we've come in terms of civil rights and in terms of women's rights, unfortunately, we've done quite a ways, but there was systemic violence in the 50s and 60s, and it was widespread, and it's very widespread today. So I think you're already doing what you're asking me just by posing that question. I don't know if it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's true. I don't care. I've turned into a cheese ball in COVID times. I'm such a cheese ball now. I don't care. I'm going to say it. Cool or not cool. The asking of the question and the fact that those students like you are asking that question is the hugest first step, because there's a recognition there. There's an acknowledgement. You can't do anything about something if you don't even acknowledge it's there. So you're acknowledging it by asking the question. Ivan was acknowledging that those two questions Ivan asked come up a lot. So I'm really glad to have heard him sort of play devil's advocate and ask those questions, because they're real questions. And it's, again, not about guilt or white guilt. That's counterproductive. It will not get us anywhere. It's about using it for I guess, the betterment of those who don't. So you combine the media aspect of it, but when you're in your circle of friends, you hear something that's homophobic, you call it out. That's what you do. You hear an anti-Muslim comment, you call it out. And you'll see that other people in the group are like, hey, that's not okay. You know, I know we're over our time, but I went to a Public Enemy concert. They're big, you know, activists when it comes to civil rights. And one of the opening bands was a Black rap band from a hip hop band from California, and they were spewing homophobic rhymes. And you know what the Montreal audience did here? We're not listening to this. It just, the whole thing died down. Everybody, the crowd dispersed. And at one point they stopped playing. They were on a little stage somewhere off to the side. We're like, because people were like, we're not going for this. That's not who we are here, you know? And it had an effect on the band. God, they just stopped, you know? So don't underestimate you as an individual, what you can do, but you have to be vocal in you have to show it. So whether that's putting a black ball as your ID, I know a lot of you are not on Facebook, but if you have your Instagram or even on Zoom, after George Floyd was murdered with the Black Lives Matter movement, if that's putting a black dot on your face, like a lot of people did, that's still doing something. But I don't feel personally it's enough. It's not enough. Social media has been around a while. It's not enough. So I'm sorry, I took a little long. I could go on and on, but I hope that does answer what you asked.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I also just want to specify, like, the difference between, I had said performative activism, but I appreciate what you said about activism as performance. That was also very...
Yeah, and I do believe in the power of art to affect change. I really, really do. The Red Dress Project with regards to missing and murdered Indigenous women, the projects from our two presenters that are up on the website in the D News right now from Women's Day, what they're doing, it speaks a lot, you know? And so a lot of you are interested in art, a lot of you are artists. Use that visibility, even if you don't have much of it, it has a big impact. Art speaks in ways that words don't. You know, images, sounds. I really believe in that as well, because I've seen it.
Thank you very much, Johanne. Unfortunately, Jen had to go, but I'd like just to make sure that we thank her very much. A round of applause for Jen for taking the time and for her brilliant presentation, and to Hope and Aiden as well. So great that they could join us and share their land acknowledgements with us. Great thanks to Johanne for sharing with us. It was a brilliant presentation. We had some active learning. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Johanne. And I look forward to reading your reflections. Hopefully, you know, for me, what's exciting about reading these reflections is how students connect the three different presentations and the insights that are generated from those connections made. Are there any last questions for Johanne or myself before we break? Thank you all very much for coming. Obviously, to the people in the class. Sarah, I see you there. Debbie, I see you there. Thank you so much for coming. Madeleine, who came. Cal, who made it. Suad, thank you for being here. So everyone, and Taslea, nice to see you. It's been a while. So thank you all so very much for coming. Students, I look forward to reading your reflections. I highly recommend you do a rough draft right now while it's still fresh in your mind. Take some notes. And if you have any questions for me, or if you have any questions for Johanne or Jen, you can contact me and I'll get them to Johanne and Jen. Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for your participation and your wonderful hearts. You're wonderful young people. And then now you've, I think all of our presenters have put a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. But since you are the best and the brightest, you're at the best college in the best city in the best country in the world. And so if not you, then who? So go forward and keep being awesome. Thank you very much, you awesome young people. If anybody has any personal questions, I'll stick around. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all very much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a great day. Have a great weekend.
Bye. Thank you.